They say a mother's instinct never sleeps, but nothing could have prepared me for what I would discover at 3 o'clock that November morning. The sound that woke me wasn't loud, just a soft, rhythmic scraping that didn't belong in the silence of my Denver home. My heart knew before my mind did that something was terribly, horrifically wrong. My name is Carolyn Mitchell. I'm 62 years old, and I've lived in this 3-story Victorian house in Denver's Capitol Hill neighborhood for 37 years. I raised my son Jacob here, watched him take his first steps on these hardwood floors, celebrated every birthday and holiday within these walls. This house has always been my sanctuary, filled with memories of laughter and love. But on that frozen November night, it became the setting for a nightmare I still can't fully comprehend. Let me take you back 2 days before that horrifying discovery. It was Jacob's 33rd birthday, and I had spent weeks planning the perfect celebration. My son had always been the light of my life, a successful architect with a kind heart and infectious smile. 3 years ago, he married Rachel, a beautiful 29-year-old pediatric nurse with golden hair and eyes that reminded me of summer skies. I had welcomed her into our family with open arms, even helping them with a $45,000 down payment on their first home. They seemed so happy, so perfect together. The birthday dinner was supposed to be intimate, just the 3 of us. Jacob had been working late on a major project for months, and I wanted to give him a peaceful evening. I prepared his favorite meal, herb-crusted lamb with roasted vegetables and my famous chocolate soufflé. Rachel arrived early to help, though she seemed distracted, checking her phone constantly. When Jacob finally came home at 8, exhausted but smiling, I pushed aside my concerns about her unusual behavior. We ate, we laughed, we reminisced about Jacob as a child. I gave him a vintage compass I'd found at an antique shop, a symbol, I told him, to always find his way home. Rachel's gift was a sleek watch, expensive and impersonal. After dinner, they stayed late, and around midnight, I suggested they sleep in Jacob's old room rather than drive home tired. Rachel agreed too quickly. Now, standing in my hallway at 3 in the morning, I understood why. The scraping sound was coming from the guest bathroom. I approached slowly, my silk robe catching on the doorframe as I peered inside. What I saw made my blood turn to ice. Rachel was on her knees, frantically scrubbing the white tile wall with a sponge that was already stained deep crimson. Blood. It was everywhere, splattered across the wall in an arc that suggested violence, pooling in the grout between tiles, staining her trembling hands. Her face was ghostly pale, her eyes wild with panic, and when she saw me standing there, she froze. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice cracking with desperation. "I'm sorry, Carolyn. I had no choice." My heart hammered against my ribs. "Where is Jacob?" My voice sounded foreign, hollow. "Where is my son?" Rachel's eyes filled with tears that spilled down her cheeks. She shook her head slowly, still clutching that blood-soaked sponge. "Don't go into the room," she pleaded. "Please, don't go into the room." But I was already moving, my feet carrying me down the hallway toward Jacob's childhood bedroom. The door was slightly ajar, and I could see darkness beyond it, thick, suffocating darkness that seemed to pulse with dread. My hand touched the doorknob, and Rachel's voice called out behind me, broken and desperate. "Carolyn, please." I pushed the door open. The room looked normal at first. The bed neatly made, Jacob's old baseball trophies still on the shelf. Then I looked down, at the floor, at what was beneath the bed. My knees gave out, and I collapsed against the doorframe. A scream trapped in my throat as the world tilted sideways, and everything I thought I knew shattered into a million irreparable pieces. If this story has gripped your heart, please show your support by liking this video and subscribing to our channel. I need to share what happened next, and I need to know I'm not alone in this darkness. Leave a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Let's connect across the miles and through this nightmare together. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't process what my eyes were showing me because it was impossible. It had to be impossible. Beneath Jacob's childhood bed, partially concealed by the hanging bed skirt, lay a large black duffel bag. But it wasn't the bag that made me collapse. It was what was visible through the partially open zipper: blood-soaked clothing, a hammer with dark stains on the metal head, and what looked horrifyingly like human hair matted with something dark and wet. "No," I whispered, then louder. "No, no, no!" My voice escalated into a shriek that echoed through the house. "What have you done? What have you done to my son?" Rachel appeared in the doorway, her face a mask of anguish and terror. "It's not what you think," she said, but her words were meaningless noise against the roaring in my ears. "Where is Jacob?" I demanded, scrambling to my feet, my hands shaking so violently I could barely keep my balance. "What is this? Whose blood is that?" I pointed at the bathroom, where the walls still bore evidence of violence. Rachel's composure cracked completely. She slid down the doorframe, sobbing so hard her whole body convulsed. "I didn't want this," she gasped between ragged breaths. "I never wanted any of this." I grabbed her shoulders, shaking her with a strength I didn't know I possessed. "Tell me where my son is. Tell me right now, or I'm calling the police." "He's alive," she screamed, and the words stopped me cold. "Jacob is alive, Carolyn. He's in the master bedroom. But you need to listen to me before you go to him. You need to understand what happened." My relief at hearing Jacob was alive lasted only seconds before a new terror took hold. "Is he hurt? Did you hurt him?" The questions tumbled out as I pushed past her, running toward my bedroom at the end of the hall. "Wait," Rachel called after me, but I was already throwing open the door. Jacob was there, sitting on my bed, very much alive but looking nothing like the son I'd celebrated with just hours before. His face was sheet white, his eyes hollow and red-rimmed from crying. His hands were wrapped in white gauze, and there were scratches on his neck. When he saw me, he looked away in shame. "Mom," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Oh, thank God," I breathed, rushing to him, touching his face, his shoulders, making sure he was real and whole. "What happened? Jacob, what is going on?" Rachel appeared behind me, and I whirled on her. "Start talking, right now. Explain this madness before I call 911. She took a shuddering breath and wiped her face with her blood-stained hands, a gesture that made her look like something from a horror film. "The blood isn't Jacob's," she began, and I felt my stomach drop. "And it's not mine either. Then whose—" I couldn't finish the question. Jacob's voice cut through the tension, dead and emotionless. "It's Derek's blood, Mom. My best friend Derek. He's dead." The room spun. Derek Morrison had been Jacob's closest friend since college. He'd been the best man at their wedding. I'd known him for over a decade. What are you saying?" "He's in the basement," Rachel said flatly. "In the freezer. It happened around 1:30 this morning." I backed away from both of them, my mind refusing to process what I was hearing. "You killed Derek? Why? How? This can't be real. This is some sick joke." "I wish it were," Jacob said, finally meeting my eyes. His gaze was haunted, destroyed. "But it's real, Mom, and it's so much worse than you can imagine." Rachel moved to the window, looking out at the dark Denver street. "Derek wasn't who we thought he was. He wasn't who anyone thought he was. For the past 6 months he'd been—" She paused, her voice breaking again. "He'd been systematically destroying our lives, stealing from us, blackmailing us. And tonight, he came here to finish what he started. To kill me," Jacob added quietly. "He came here with a gun, Mom. He was going to kill me and make it look like a suicide. And he would have succeeded if Rachel hadn't—" "Hadn't what?" I demanded, though part of me didn't want to know. Rachel turned back to face me, and in her eyes I saw something that chilled me more than anything else that night. A cold, calculating hardness I'd never seen before. "If I hadn't hit him first, 3 times with the hammer from your garage, hard enough to make sure he'd never hurt anyone again." The silence that followed was absolute. Outside, Denver slept peacefully, unaware that in this Victorian house on a quiet street, 3 people's lives had just been torn apart forever. I should have called the police immediately. That's what any sane person would do. But as I stood there in my bedroom, looking at my son's devastated face and my daughter-in-law's blood-covered hands, I found myself unable to move, unable to think beyond the immediate horror of what they were telling me. "Show me," I finally said, my voice steady despite the chaos raging inside me. "Take me to the basement. I need to see Derek." Jacob's head snapped up. "Mom, no. You don't need to see—" "Take me now," I commanded with a force that surprised us all. "If you expect me to believe any of this insanity, if you expect me to do anything except call 911 right this second, then I need to see the truth with my own eyes." Rachel and Jacob exchanged a long look, some wordless communication passing between them. Finally, Rachel nodded. Okay, but Carolyn, please prepare yourself. It's bad. We moved through the house like ghosts, our footsteps eerily silent on the stairs leading down to my finished basement. I'd converted this space 5 years ago into an entertainment room with a small kitchenette and a large freezer I'd bought for $800 to store bulk groceries. That freezer now held something far more sinister than frozen vegetables. Rachel's hand trembled as she reached for the freezer lid. We wrapped him in plastic sheeting from the garage, she explained, her voice mechanical, detached. We didn't know what else to do. We panicked. When she lifted the lid, the cold air that escaped carried with it the faint copper smell of blood. Inside, wrapped in clear plastic that was fogged with condensation, I could make out the unmistakable shape of a human body. Derek's face was partially visible through the plastic, his eyes closed, his skin already taking on the waxy appearance of death. There was a massive wound on the right side of his head, dark and devastating. I staggered backward, my hand over my mouth. Oh God, this is real. Jacob caught me before I fell. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry you have to see this. I pulled away from him, my mind racing. Tell me everything, from the beginning. No lies, no omissions. If I'm going to help you, and I haven't decided if I will, I need to know exactly what happened and why. We moved back upstairs to the living room. Rachel made coffee with shaking hands, while Jacob began the story that would change everything I thought I knew about my son's life. It started 6 months ago, Jacob began, sitting forward with his elbows on his knees. Derek came to me with what seemed like an amazing investment opportunity. A commercial real estate deal in Boulder, a strip mall that was supposedly undervalued. He said he'd already invested $50,000 of his own money and was looking for partners. He needed $75,000 from me to close the deal. He showed me documents, property assessments, projected returns of 30% within a year. My stomach sank. I knew where this was going. I didn't have that much liquid, Jacob continued, so I took out a loan against the house. Rachel didn't know. I forged her signature on the documents. I thought I'd surprise her when the returns came in, pay off the loan, and we'd have this amazing nest egg. I was an idiot. Rachel set down the coffee cups with enough force to make them rattle. The property didn't exist, she said bitterly. The documents were all fake. Derek had become an expert at forgery, at creating fake companies and fake investments. He wasn't just scamming Jacob. He'd done it to at least 4 other people we know of. He'd stolen over $300,000 total. When I realized what happened, I confronted him, Jacob said. That was 4 months ago, and that's when everything got worse. Derek told me he had evidence of the loan fraud, proof that I'd forged Rachel's signature. He said if I went to the police about the investment scam, he'd make sure I went to prison for bank fraud. He could destroy my architecture license, my career, everything. So he started blackmailing you, I said, the pieces falling into place. Every month, $5,000, Jacob confirmed. Money we didn't have. We've been drowning, Mom. Rachel took extra shifts at the hospital. I worked weekends. We sold Rachel's car, jewelry her grandmother left her, worth $12,000. We emptied our savings, another $23,000. We stopped paying our mortgage. We're 3 months behind, facing foreclosure. And Derek just kept demanding more. Rachel's voice was hollow. Last week, he increased it to $8,000 a month. We couldn't do it anymore. We told him we had nothing left, and that's when he sent Jacob a text message that changed everything. Jacob pulled out his phone with his bandaged hands and showed me the screen. The message from Derek, sent 2 days ago, made my blood run cold. If you can't pay, I'll take something else instead. Your life insurance policy is worth $500,000. Rachel will be set for life. See you at your birthday celebration. It ends Tuesday night. I read Derek's text message 3 times, each reading making my hands shake more violently. The casual cruelty of it, the calculated premeditation, was almost more horrifying than finding his body in my freezer. He was going to murder you, I whispered, looking at Jacob. He was actually going to murder you and make Rachel the beneficiary. We didn't believe it at first, Rachel said, her voice raw. We thought maybe it was just another threat, another way to torture us. But then yesterday morning Jacob received a package. Jacob reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, smoothing it on the coffee table. It was a photograph, and what it showed made my breath catch. The image was of Jacob's car in the driveway of a remote cabin, taken from a distance. In the bottom corner, someone had written in red ink, "Suicide location secured. Tuesday, 2 a.m." He'd been planning this for weeks, Jacob explained. Maybe months. He'd rented a cabin in the mountains under a fake name. His plan was to drug me at the birthday dinner, probably something in the wine, then drive me there while I was unconscious, make it look like I'd driven there myself, despondent over financial problems. He'd even researched the kind of suicide note that would be most convincing. Rachel wrapped her arms around herself. We found all of this out tonight. Well, technically last night now. Derek arrived at 1:15 a.m., 3 hours after he was supposed to. He thought we'd be asleep. He had keys to your house, Carolyn. Keys he'd copied months ago when he borrowed them to make you a surprise birthday gift last year. Remember that? I did remember. Derek had seemed so thoughtful, so kind. The gift had been a custom doormat with my initials. And all along, he'd been planning how to destroy my family. He came in through the basement door, Jacob continued. We were still awake, couldn't sleep knowing what was coming. We heard him moving around down there, probably setting up, getting ready. I wanted to call the police right then, but Rachel reminded me that we had no proof that would stand up in court, just a threatening text message that could be explained away as a bad joke. And we still had that loan fraud hanging over our heads. Derek had made sure we were trapped. So what did you do? I asked, though I already knew the answer made me complicit in this nightmare. Rachel's eyes met mine, and I saw the desperate resolve there. We decided to confront him, to record the conversation on Jacob's phone, get him to confess to everything, the scam, the blackmail, the murder plot. We thought if we had clear evidence, we could go to the police and the loan fraud would seem minor compared to attempted murder. We were stupid, Jacob said bitterly. We thought we could outsmart him. Rachel stood and began pacing, reliving the nightmare. We found him in your basement, going through that old filing cabinet you keep there. He had a gun, Carolyn, a 9mm pistol with a silencer. He wasn't even surprised when we walked in. He just smiled this horrible smile and said, "You're early. I thought I'd have to come wake you up." Jacob tried to talk to him, she continued, tried to reason with him, offered him everything. We'd sign over the house deed, empty any remaining accounts, anything to just end this and let us walk away. You know what Derek said? I shook my head, transfixed by the horror of the story. He said, "It's not about the money anymore. It's about the principle. You tried to stand up to me, and I can't let that go unpunished. Besides, $500,000 from your life insurance is better than whatever scraps you have left." Jacob's voice cracked as he picked up the story. He pointed the gun at me, just raised it, and pointed it right at my chest. Rachel screamed, and I saw my whole life flash before my eyes. Stupid cliché, but it's true. I thought about you, Mom, about how you'd find out your son had died, about the funeral, about how Derek would probably be there, playing the grieving best friend. And I saw the hammer, Rachel said quietly. Your hammer, Carolyn, the one you keep on the workbench by the basement stairs. I don't remember deciding to grab it. I don't remember moving. All I remember is that Derek was turning toward me. He'd heard me move, and if I didn't do something right then, both Jacob and I would die in your basement. The silence that followed was suffocating. I could picture it all too clearly. Rachel, desperate and terrified, swinging that hammer. Derek, surprised in that final moment, realizing too late that his victims had fought back. The first hit caught him on the shoulder, Rachel continued, her voice taking on a distant quality, as if she were describing something that had happened to someone else. He spun around, and the gun went flying. The second hit caught him in the arm. He was screaming, calling me names, lunging for the gun. And the third hit? She didn't finish, but she didn't need to. The third hit had been the one that killed him, the one that had left that devastating wound I'd seen through the plastic wrap. He died almost instantly, Jacob said. One moment he was reaching for the gun, and the next he was just gone, collapsed on your basement floor. And we just stood there, frozen, watching blood spread across the concrete. That's when we realized what we'd done. That's when the panic set in. The grandfather clock in my hallway chimed 4 times, each gong echoing through the house like a death knell. 4 in the morning. Just an hour since I'd woken to find my world transformed into a waking nightmare. I looked at Jacob and Rachel, these 2 people I loved, and saw them clearly for perhaps the first time. Not as the perfect couple I'd idealized, but as desperate, flawed human beings who'd been pushed to the absolute edge. Walk me through what happened after, I said, forcing my voice to remain calm even as my insides churned. After Derek died, every detail. Jacob and Rachel exchanged another one of those loaded glances. Finally, Jacob spoke. We panicked. Complete, total panic. There was so much blood, Mom. It was everywhere. On the floor, splattered on the walls, on us. Rachel was hyperventilating, and I thought she might pass out. I grabbed her, made her look at me, tried to get her to breathe normally. We knew we should call the police, Rachel interjected. For maybe 30 seconds, we actually reached for the phone. But then Jacob remembered something Derek had said a month ago when he'd increased the blackmail payment. He'd told Jacob that if anything ever happened to him, if he died or disappeared, he had a lawyer who would automatically receive an envelope containing all the evidence of Jacob's loan fraud, along with additional manufactured evidence that would make it look like Jacob had been embezzling from his clients. My heart sank. So even in death, he had you trapped. We didn't know if it was true, Jacob said, but we couldn't take the chance. If we called the police, I'd be arrested for the loan fraud regardless of whether the self-defense claim held up. My architectural license would be revoked immediately. We'd lose everything we'd already sacrificed, and I'd probably still end up in prison. Rachel might face charges too. Colorado's self-defense laws are complicated, especially when you pursue the attacker instead of retreating. Rachel's voice was hollow. So we made a choice. A horrible, probably unforgivable choice. We decided to hide it. We spent the next hour cleaning, Jacob continued. We used every cleaning supply we could find in your house. Bleach, hydrogen peroxide, ammonia. We mixed things we probably shouldn't have mixed. We scrubbed the blood off the basement floor, the walls, the stairs. We wrapped Derek's body in plastic sheeting from the garage. You had 3 rolls, remember? From when you were going to paint last year. I did remember. I'd bought them for $67 at Home Depot and never gotten around to the painting project. Now they were serving as a makeshift body bag. The hardest part was moving him, Rachel said, shuddering at the memory. He was heavy, about 190 pounds of dead weight. We had to drag him across the basement floor to the freezer. We kept having to stop because Jacob's hands were blistered from gripping the plastic. That explained the bandages. What happened to your hands, Jacob? When Derek swung at Rachel, I grabbed the gun by the barrel, he explained. It was still hot from when he'd been doing whatever he was doing before we confronted him. Maybe test firing it or something. I got burned, and then in the struggle, I cut my palms on something sharp, maybe broken glass from a picture frame Derek knocked over. After we got him in the freezer, we realized we still had the gun to deal with, Rachel said. Derek's car was parked 2 blocks away. We found his keys in his pocket. Jacob drove the car to a 24-hour grocery store parking lot and left it there with the gun locked in the trunk. We figured it would eventually be towed, and if the gun was ever found, there'd be no way to connect it to us or to this house. But we forgot about the blood in the bathroom, Jacob added. There was a spot on the wall. Derek's blood from where he'd brushed against it when we dragged him past. I didn't notice it until after we'd finished with the basement, around 3. Rachel was trying to clean it when you found her. I stood and walked to the window, looking out at my quiet street. In a few hours, my neighbors would wake up, start their coffee makers, walk their dogs, completely oblivious to the fact that a violent death had occurred just hours before in this respectable neighborhood. How quickly normalcy could become a facade, I thought. How quickly everything could change. What about your phone recording? I asked, turning back. You said you were trying to record Derek's confession. Jacob's face fell. I started the recording, but when Derek pulled the gun, my phone was in my pocket. All it captured was muffled shouting and sounds of the struggle. There's nothing usable on it. No clear confession, no proof of his intent, just chaos. And the evidence he claimed to have? I pressed. The documents? The lawyer? All of it? We've been searching his apartment remotely through his laptop. We knew his passwords, Rachel admitted. So far, we haven't found anything. No lawyer, no safety deposit box, no envelope of evidence. We hope, it was all a bluff, just another way to control us. You broke into his apartment? His laptop, Jacob corrected. He gave me his passwords 2 years ago when he needed me to send an email from his account while he was traveling. We used remote access software. Technically not breaking in, but definitely illegal. I absorbed all of this, my mind working through the implications. My son and daughter-in-law had killed a man, hidden his body in my freezer, disposed of evidence, and hacked into the victim's computer. Even if Derek had been planning to murder Jacob, and I believed he was, The steps they'd taken afterward had transformed a potential self-defense case into something far more sinister. "Have you thought about what happens next?" I asked quietly. "Derek will be reported missing. There will be an investigation. People will ask questions." "We know," Jacob said miserably. "That's why we're telling you everything. Because we need help, Mom. We need someone who can think clearly, because we're drowning here." Rachel added, "Derek's parents are both dead. He has a sister in Maine he hasn't spoken to in 5 years. His co-workers at the investment firm, the fake one, they were all part of his con, all fictional people with fake email addresses. His real job was as a freelance consultant. He could disappear for weeks without anyone noticing. But eventually someone will notice," I said. "Eventually someone will care that he's gone." As if on cue, Jacob's phone buzzed on the coffee table. We all stared at it like it might explode. Slowly, Jacob picked it up and looked at the screen. The color drained from his face. "It's a text," he whispered. "From Derek's phone. Sent automatically, I think. It says, 'If you're reading this, I'm either dead or in trouble. Check your email. You'll find everything you need to know about who's responsible.'" The truth always comes out, Jacob. Always. The automated text message from Derek's phone felt like a hand reaching from beyond the grave. Rachel immediately began hyperventilating again, and Jacob's face had gone from pale to completely ashen. My own heart hammered so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. "When was it sent?" I demanded, forcing myself to think, practically even as panic threatened to overwhelm me. Jacob checked the timestamp. 3:47 a.m. It's scheduled, probably through an app. If Derek didn't disable the message by a certain time, then it gets sent automatically, I finished. Meaning he had a dead man's switch, a way to ensure his revenge even if he died. Rachel was pulling at her hair, her voice rising toward hysteria. "The email. We need to check the email. What did it say? What evidence did he send?" Jacob was already opening his laptop with shaking hands, logging into his email account. We huddled around the screen as the inbox loaded. There, sent at 3:47 a.m., was a message from Derek's email address. The subject line read, "The truth about Jacob Mitchell." "Open it," I instructed, though every fiber of my being dreaded what we'd find. Jacob clicked, and we read in horror. The email was professionally written, detailing everything. The fake investment scheme, the $75,000 Jacob had stolen through loan fraud, and, most damning, a series of photographs that appeared to show Jacob threatening Derek. The photos were clearly doctored, but expertly done. In them, Jacob appeared to be wielding a weapon, his face twisted in rage, while Derek cowered in fear. "He staged these," Jacob breathed. "These photos are from different times, different places. He photoshopped them together. Look, that's my body from my LinkedIn profile photo. But the background is your basement, Mom. He must have taken photos of your basement when he borrowed your keys last year." But the worst part was the email's recipient list. Derek hadn't just sent it to Jacob. He'd sent it to 47 people. Jacob's business partners, his major clients, Rachel's hospital administrator, my neighbors, friends from church, even the local news station. "We're destroyed," Rachel whispered. "Even if we explain, even if we prove the photos are fake, everyone will know about the loan fraud. Jacob's career is over. My reputation at the hospital is finished, and when Derek's body is found..." She couldn't finish the sentence. I was about to respond when my own phone buzzed. Then Jacob's, then Rachel's. All at once, a cascade of notifications erupted from our devices. Text messages, phone calls, Facebook notifications, emails, all of them from people who'd received Derek's posthumous message. "Don't answer," I ordered. "Not yet. We need time to think." But it was too late. The damage was spreading like wildfire through our social networks. I watched in real time as the email was shared, screenshotted, forwarded. Within minutes, it would be everywhere. The court of public opinion had already begun its deliberations, and we had no defense. Jacob collapsed on the couch, his head in his hands. He won. Even dead, Derek Morrison won. He's destroying us from beyond the grave. "No," I said firmly, an idea beginning to form in my mind. "He's given us something valuable." They both looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "Don't you see?" I continued, my thoughts racing. "This email proves Derek was sophisticated, calculating. It proves he was capable of elaborate deception. Those fake photos, they demonstrate his ability to manufacture evidence. The timing, sending it automatically after his death, shows premeditation on his part. This isn't the action of an innocent victim. This is the behavior of someone with something to hide. Rachel's eyes widened with understanding. You're saying we use his own manipulation against him? Exactly, I confirmed. But we need to act fast, and we need to be smart. First, we need to find out if Derek really had evidence stored somewhere, or if that was just another bluff. Second, we need to establish a timeline that works in our favor. And third, I paused, knowing what I was about to suggest would cross a line from which there was no return. We need to make Derek's body disappear completely. Mom, Jacob started, but I cut him off. Listen to me. Right now, you have a small window. Derek sent that email expecting to be alive to see the fallout, to watch you suffer. But he's not alive. And without a body, without physical evidence of foul play, this whole thing becomes a he said, she said situation. You can claim Derek sent that email as part of his scam, that he's disappeared with money from other victims, that the threats against you prove he was dangerous, but his body is in your freezer, Rachel pointed out. How do we make that disappear? I'd been thinking about that. My late husband, Bill, was an avid outdoorsman. He took me camping in the Rockies dozens of times. I know places where no one goes, remote locations where the ground is soft enough to dig even in November, places where a body wrapped in plastic could remain hidden for decades, maybe forever. The suggestion hung in the air like poison gas. I was proposing we become not just accessories after the fact, but active participants in covering up a death. Even if Derek had been planning murder, even if Rachel had acted in defense of Jacob's life, what I was suggesting would transform us all into criminals. There's another way, Jacob said suddenly. What if we don't hide the body? What if we stage it? Stage it how? I asked. Jacob's mind was clearly racing, the architect in him solving a horrible spatial problem. Derek was planning to make my death look like suicide. What if we flip the script? What if we make his death look like suicide, a guilty man unable to live with his crimes, finally taking the only way out? Rachel caught on immediately. We could put his body in his car, park it somewhere remote. No, I interrupted. Too many variables, too much forensic evidence. DNA, fingerprints, blood spatter analysis. A medical examiner would spot problems immediately. Then what? Jacob asked desperately. I thought about it, examining the problem from every angle. Then it hit me. We tell the truth, or a version of it. They stared at me. We call the police right now, I continued. We tell them Derek came here planning to murder Jacob. We show them the texts, the threats, the evidence of the investment scam. We explain that Rachel acted in self-defense when Derek pulled a gun. The gun that's currently in Derek's car trunk. We retrieve that first and place it at the scene where Derek fell. But we cleaned up, Rachel protested. We moved the body. We waited 3 hours. No police department will believe the self-defense claim now. They might if we have the right lawyer, I countered. And if we have additional evidence that supports our story. Evidence we're going to manufacture in the next 2 hours before we make that call. The next 2 hours were the most intense and morally compromising of my entire 62 years on this earth. I'd always considered myself a law-abiding citizen, someone who followed rules, paid taxes on time, and believed in justice. But watching my son's life crumble in real time, seeing the desperation in Rachel's eyes, I discovered I was capable of things I'd never imagined. First, I said, taking charge with a clarity born of desperation, we need to retrieve Derek's gun and stage the basement scene as it should have happened. Rachel, write down everything you remember about the actual confrontation, where everyone was standing, what was said, the sequence of events. Jacob, you're going to draw it. I need an architectural diagram showing the trajectory, the blood spatter, everything. While they worked, I made the most difficult decision of my life. I went to my bedroom, to the safe hidden behind the family portrait, and retrieved my late husband's revolver, a .38 special he'd kept for home protection and taught me to shoot 30 years ago. I'd fired it maybe a dozen times at a range. Now I was going to use it to commit a crime. I drove the gun to the 24-hour grocery store parking lot where Jacob had left Derek's car, my hands steady on the wheel, even as my conscience screamed. The parking lot was mostly empty at 5:15 a.m. Derek's black sedan sat under a flickering streetlight. Using the keys Jacob had given me, I opened the trunk. Derek's gun was there, still in a plastic bag. I put on latex gloves, the kind I kept for hair dye, and carefully extracted it. The weapon was cold, heavier than I expected. I placed my husband's revolver in the trunk instead, wrapped in a different plastic bag. If the police ever searched this car, they'd find a gun, but it would be the wrong one that couldn't be traced to Derek or to my house. Back home, I found Jacob and Rachel had created a detailed diagram of the basement. It was architecturally precise, showing angles, distances, and blood spatter patterns that matched what had actually happened. Good, I said. Now we stage it. Using Derek's actual gun, we recreated the scene in the basement. Jacob positioned himself where he'd been standing when Derek pointed the weapon at him. I placed the gun on the floor where it would have fallen after Derek was hit. Then came the hardest part. We need to put him back, I said quietly. Back where he fell. The three of us struggled to remove Derek's plastic-wrapped body from the freezer. He was rigid now, frozen solid, and moving him was like trying to maneuver a grotesque statue. We positioned him on the basement floor approximately where Rachel said he'd fallen, though the frozen state of the body made it impossible to make it look entirely natural. The blood, Rachel said. We cleaned it all up. Do we still have the cleaning rags? I asked. We did. Dozens of paper towels and old cloths, all stained with Derek's blood, which we'd bagged and hidden in the garage. Now we used them to restage the scene, placing them around Derek's body as if we'd attempted to stop the bleeding, to save him. It was macabre, horrifying work, but necessary. At 6:30 a.m., as the first hints of dawn began to lighten the Denver sky, we gathered in my living room one final time to rehearse our story. The version we would tell the police, the version that was 90% truth and 10% strategic omission. Derek arrived at approximately 1:15 a.m., Jacob recited. He let himself in using keys he'd copied. We confronted him in the basement. He pulled a gun. Rachel acted in self-defense, striking him with a hammer that was on the workbench. He fell and hit his head. We panicked because of the loan fraud situation. We cleaned up in a state of shock and confusion. Then we realized we needed to come clean and call the police. Total time elapsed, about 5.5 hours. What about Derek's threatening email? Rachel asked. The one that was just sent out? That works in our favor now, I said. It demonstrates his malicious intent. It proves he was willing to destroy Jacob's reputation. It provides motive for why he might have tried to kill Jacob. But it also provides motive for why we might have killed him, Jacob countered. The police will see that. Let them, I said. Self-defense doesn't require you to have no motive. It requires reasonable fear for your life. And Derek had a gun, had made death threats, and had broken into my home in the middle of the night. That's textbook self-defense territory. Rachel was shaking, near the breaking point. What if they don't believe us? What if they find evidence we missed? What if... Then we deal with it, I said firmly, taking her hands in mine. But right now, we make the call. We tell our story. And we hope that justice, real justice, not legal technicalities, prevails. At 6:45 a.m., as my neighbors began to stir and the morning shift workers started their commutes, I dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? I took a deep breath, and with a voice that trembled with genuine emotion, because despite the staging, the fear was real, I said, there's been an intruder in my home. He tried to kill my son. My daughter-in-law defended him, and the intruder is dead. We need police and an ambulance immediately. I gave my address. The dispatcher kept me on the line, asking questions I answered with carefully crafted versions of the truth. In the distance, I could already hear sirens beginning their wail. Jacob and Rachel sat together on the couch, holding hands so tightly their knuckles were white. I looked at them. These two people who'd been pushed to the absolute edge by a predator who'd disguised himself as a friend, and I felt no regret for what we'd done, only fear of what came next. The sirens grew louder. Red and blue lights began to flash through my windows. I went to the door, preparing to face the consequences of our choices, whatever they might be. As I reached for the doorknob, Jacob's voice stopped me. Mom, thank you for everything, for believing us. I turned back, tears finally spilling down my cheeks. That's what mothers do, sweetheart. We protect our children, no matter what. The pounding on my door began. Police, open up. I opened the door to 6 officers with drawn weapons, their faces hard and professional. Behind them, an ambulance waited, its lights painting the street in urgent colors. My quiet Denver morning had become a crime scene, and nothing would ever be the same. The detective's name was Sarah Martinez, A woman in her mid-40s with sharp eyes that seemed to catalog every micro-expression, every pause, every word. She'd separated us immediately, Jacob in one police car, Rachel in another, me in my living room with 2 officers standing guard. Standard procedure, she explained. Need to get everyone's story independently. For 3 hours, Detective Martinez questioned me. She was professional, even kind, but I could feel her probing for inconsistencies, testing my story against whatever physical evidence her crime scene team was gathering from my basement. Mrs. Mitchell, walk me through the timeline again. When did you first become aware there was someone in your house? I repeated the story we'd crafted, sticking as close to the truth as possible. The 3 a.m. wake-up, finding Rachel cleaning blood, discovering Jacob, learning about Derek's months-long campaign of extortion and threats, the decision, our terrible panic decision, to clean up before calling police. That's a 5.5-hour delay, Martinez pointed out. You didn't think to call 911 immediately? I was in shock, I said, which was absolutely true. My daughter-in-law had just killed someone in my basement. My son was wrapped in gauze, traumatized. They were talking about blackmail and murder plots and investment fraud. I couldn't process it. I couldn't think straight. But you could think straight enough to help stage a crime scene? Her eyes never left mine. We didn't stage anything, I said carefully. We cleaned up blood because we were in shock and didn't know what else to do. When we finally came to our senses and realized we needed to report what happened, we called immediately. Martinez consulted her notes. Your son claims Derek Morrison had a gun. That Rachel hit him with a hammer in self-defense when he pointed that gun at Jacob, but we haven't found a gun. My heart skipped, but I kept my expression neutral. Have you checked Derek's car? Jacob said something about Derek having left his car a few blocks away. We're looking into that, Martinez said non-committally. What's interesting, Mrs. Mitchell, is that we received multiple calls this morning, dozens of them, from people who got an email from Derek Morrison. An email sent automatically after his death, accusing your son of fraud and threatening behavior. That's quite a coincidence, don't you think? It's not a coincidence, I said firmly. It's proof of exactly what we've been telling you. Derek was a sociopath who'd been systematically destroying my son's life. That email? That's his final revenge. He set it up to damage Jacob even after death. It proves he was capable of elaborate manipulation. Or, Martinez countered, it proves your son had motive to kill him. In self-defense, I emphasized. Rachel hit Derek in self-defense when he threatened Jacob with a gun. That's not murder. That's protecting someone you love. The interrogation continued for another hour. Martinez asked about the investment scam, the loan fraud, the $75,000 Jacob had lost. She asked about Rachel's nursing background, whether she'd have known exactly where to hit someone with a hammer to cause fatal damage. Are you saying Rachel deliberately killed him? I asked, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. Because she didn't. She swung a hammer in desperation to save my son's life. The fact that it killed Derek is tragic, but it doesn't make it murder. Martinez stood, gathering her notes. Mrs. Mitchell, I'm going to be honest with you. Your story has problems. The delay in reporting, the cleaned-up crime scene, the convenient timing of Derek's email, the fact that we can't find this alleged gun. Right now, all I have is 3 people who claim self-defense and a dead man who can't tell his side of the story. His side would be lies, I said. Everything Derek said or did in the last 6 months was a lie. Maybe, Martinez conceded. We're checking his financial records, his apartment, his devices. If what you're saying is true, if he really was running elaborate cons and blackmail schemes, we'll find evidence of it. But Mrs. Mitchell, I need you to understand something. Even if Derek Morrison was everything you say he was, even if he was planning to kill your son, the way you handled this aftermath makes it very difficult for us to treat this as a clear-cut self-defense case. She left me alone with my thoughts and my guards. Through the window, I could see the crime scene unit working in my basement, photographing, measuring, collecting evidence. Every choice we'd made in those panicked hours was now under microscopic scrutiny. 2 hours later, Martinez returned with new information. Her expression had shifted subtly, less skeptical, more thoughtful. Mrs. Mitchell, we found Derek Morrison's car, and we found a gun in the trunk, a .38 special revolver. We'll need to run ballistics, but it appears to be a functional weapon. We also accessed his laptop and found some concerning files. My heart leaped with hope, though I kept my face carefully neutral. The The wrong gun, but a gun nonetheless. And the files, those must be Derek's records of his various scams and schemes. What kind of files? I asked. Investment documents that appear to be fraudulent, multiple identities, email accounts under fake names, and searches. Lots of searches about how to make murders look like suicide, about Colorado's life insurance laws, about drugs that can incapacitate someone without being easily detected in toxicology screens. Martinez paused. He also had photos stored in a hidden folder. Photos of your son, your house, that cabin you mentioned. It's building a picture consistent with your story. Relief flooded through me, but Martinez held up a hand. However, we still have significant concerns. The medical examiner's preliminary report indicates Derek Morrison was struck 3 times with the hammer. 3 deliberate blows. That's harder to characterize as pure self-defense panic. It suggests intention, control. He was reaching for the gun, I said, repeating what Rachel had told me. He'd already pointed it at Jacob once. Rachel hit him. He spun around, still trying to reach the weapon. She hit him again, and then once more to make sure he couldn't hurt anyone. That's not murder, detective. That's a terrified woman protecting her husband. Martinez sighed. The district attorney will make the final call. But Mrs. Mitchell, I need to tell you, all 3 of you are likely facing charges. Maybe not murder, but evidence tampering, obstruction of justice, possibly manslaughter. The fact that you cleaned the crime scene, moved the body, waited hours to call us, those actions have consequences. I understand, I said quietly. But detective, please consider this. If we'd called 911 immediately, Derek's automated email would still have been sent. Jacob would still be facing public humiliation and career destruction. Rachel would still be traumatized from having to kill someone. The only difference is that we wouldn't have had time to gather our thoughts and explain the full context of what Derek had done to us. We weren't trying to get away with murder. We were trying to make sure the truth, the whole truth about Derek's predatory behavior, would come out. Martinez looked at me for a long moment. Did you know that Derek Morrison had a sealed juvenile record? Assault with a deadly weapon when he was 16. The victim recanted, said it was self-defense, and the case was dismissed. But there was a pattern, Mrs. Mitchell. Derek Morrison had been hurting people and manipulating his way out of consequences his entire adult life. This time, he finally went too far. She stood to leave, then paused at the door. I'm not saying what you did was right. The law exists for good reasons, and you broke it when you cleaned that crime scene. But I am saying that I believe you. I believe Derek Morrison was dangerous. I believe he was planning to murder your son. And I believe Rachel acted to protect Jacob. Whether that's enough for the DA, I don't know. But for what it's worth, you have my sympathy. After she left, I sat in my living room. This room where Jacob had celebrated so many birthdays, where we'd opened Christmas presents, where I'd rocked him as a baby, and I wept, not from fear of consequences or regret for my actions, but from sheer exhaustion. The weight of what we'd done, what we'd been forced to do, settled on my shoulders like a physical burden. The next 72 hours were a blur of lawyers, news cameras, and viral social media posts. Derek's automated email had done its intended damage, spreading across Denver like wildfire. By the afternoon of that first day, Jacob's face was on every local news channel, accompanied by those doctored photos and headlines screaming, "Architect accused of fraud linked to suspicious death." We hired Martin Castellano, a criminal defense attorney who cost $15,000 just for the retainer, money I paid by taking out a loan against my house, the same house where Derek had died. The irony wasn't lost on me. The good news, Castellano told us at our first meeting in his downtown office, is that the physical evidence is largely in your favor. The gun, Derek's searches, his financial records, they all support the narrative that he was a predator who got what was coming to him. The bad news is that the delay in reporting and the cleaned crime scene severely complicate the self-defense claim. What are we looking at? Jacob asked. His face had aged 10 years in 3 days. Best case, the DA decides not to charge Rachel with anything. Self-defense is accepted. You and your mother get charged with evidence tampering and obstruction, which could mean probation or community service. Worst case, Rachel gets charged with voluntary manslaughter. You both get the same, and all of you do prison time. 2 to 6 years. Rachel made a sound like a wounded animal. I was defending my husband. I saved his life. And they're going to send me to prison? The law isn't always about what's morally right, Castellano said bluntly. It's about what's legally provable. And right now, the state has a strong case that all of you obstructed justice. The question is whether the DA thinks it's worth pursuing, given the circumstances. But the legal battle was only half the war we were fighting. The court of public opinion was far less forgiving and had no rules of evidence. Social media exploded with theories and accusations. Facebook groups formed overnight. Justice for Derek Morrison on one side, support the Mitchell family on the other. Jacob's architectural firm put him on immediate leave. Rachel's hospital did the same, citing the need to investigate whether her nursing license should be suspended. The local news ran nightly segments. Some painted us as a family protecting themselves from a dangerous predator. Others portrayed Derek as a misunderstood victim of a violent woman and her enabling family. The truth, as always, was more complex than either narrative. Derek's sister from Maine appeared on camera, tears streaming down her face. "My brother wasn't perfect," she sobbed, "but he didn't deserve to die like that. He didn't deserve to be killed and hidden in a freezer like garbage." She didn't mention that she hadn't spoken to Derek in 5 years, that she'd cut him off after he'd stolen $8,000 from her during their mother's funeral. But the real turning point came on day 4, when one of Derek's other victims finally came forward. Her name was Patricia Chen, a 47-year-old real estate agent. She held a press conference outside the courthouse, flanked by her own attorney. "Derek Morrison stole $140,000 from me and my husband," she announced to the assembled media. "He promised us a development deal in Colorado Springs that would triple our investment. The development never existed. When we threatened to go to the police, he told us he had evidence we'd committed tax fraud. Manufactured evidence, we later discovered. He blackmailed us for 8 months, bleeding us dry until we had nothing left. We lost our home. My husband had a nervous breakdown and is still in therapy." The cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. Patricia continued, "When I heard that Derek was dead, my first feeling was relief. Not sadness, not shock, relief, because I knew the nightmare was finally over. And when I heard that the woman who killed him did so protecting her husband from Derek's plan to murder him, I wasn't surprised. Derek Morrison was a monster who destroyed lives for sport. If what happened to him was wrong legally, I understand that. But morally, that man got exactly what he deserved." Her statement changed everything. Within hours, 2 more victims came forward, then 5, then a dozen. The narrative shifted. Suddenly, Derek wasn't a tragic victim, but a predatory sociopath who terrorized multiple families. The Justice for Derek Morrison Facebook group quietly disbanded. The news coverage turned sympathetic toward us. On day 7, Detective Martinez called with news. "The DA's office has decided not to charge Rachel with any crime related to Derek's death. They're accepting the self-defense claim. However, both you and your mother are being charged with misdemeanor obstruction of justice and evidence tampering. You'll be arraigned next week." "What about Jacob's loan fraud?" I asked. "What about the forged signature?" "The bank has decided not to press charges," Martinez said. "Given the circumstances, the fact that Jacob was under extreme duress due to Derek's blackmail, they've agreed to work out a repayment plan instead. You're lucky. This could have gone much worse." Lucky. That word echoed in my head for days. Were we lucky? We'd survived legally, but at what cost? Jacob's architectural license was under review, a process that could take months and might still result in suspension. Rachel had returned to work, but the whispers followed her through the hospital corridors. My neighbors looked at me differently now, with a mixture of sympathy and unease. My house, once a sanctuary, now felt like a crime scene I couldn't escape. The financial damage was catastrophic. Between legal fees, the money Jacob owed on the fraudulent loan, Rachel's car they'd sold, and my own loan against the house, we were collectively $287,000 in debt. The investment Jacob had made, that $75,000 that had started this whole nightmare, was completely gone, along with all their savings. But we were alive. We were free. And Derek Morrison, who'd planned to murder my son and make it look like suicide, was dead. At night, I still heard the sounds sometimes. Rachel scrubbing blood from the walls, Jacob's muffled sobs, the terrible thud of the hammer striking flesh. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, reliving those hours when I'd transformed from a law-abiding citizen into someone who could stage a crime scene and lie to police. Morally, I knew we'd been in the right. Derek had been planning to kill Jacob. Rachel had acted to save him. Everything we did afterward was in service of protecting ourselves from a dead man's final revenge. But legally, ethically, those lines were far more blurred than I'd ever imagined they could be. 6 months later, on a warm May morning, I stood in my garden, pruning roses, and reflected on everything that had changed. The court proceedings had finally concluded. Jacob and I each pled guilty to misdemeanor charges, received 1 year of probation, and were sentenced to 200 hours of community service. Rachel was fully exonerated, the DA formally acknowledging that her actions constituted legitimate self-defense. But the legal victory felt hollow compared to the price we'd paid in other ways. Jacob's architectural license was suspended for 2 years. He now worked as a consultant, a pale shadow of the thriving career he'd built over a decade. The suspension would eventually be lifted, but the stain on his reputation would never fully disappear. Clients who'd once eagerly sought his designs now hesitated, Googling his name and finding articles about that terrible November night. Rachel had kept her nursing license, but she'd transferred to a different hospital across town, unable to bear the weight of her coworkers' stares and whispered conversations. She'd killed someone, even in self-defense, even to save her husband. That fact haunted her. She'd started therapy twice a week and had nightmares most nights. The debt hung over us like a dark cloud. We'd managed to restructure some of it, negotiate payment plans, but the $287,000 we collectively owed would take years to repay. I'd gone back to work part-time at a local library, something I'd never expected to do at 62. Jacob and Rachel had sold their house, the one I'd helped them buy with that $45,000 down payment, and moved into a smaller apartment. Every dollar went toward debt repayment, but we were together. We were alive, and slowly, painfully, we were healing. The victims of Derek's other schemes had formed a support group. There were 17 of us in total, people he'd swindled out of amounts ranging from $8,000 to $180,000. We met monthly in a church basement, sharing our stories, supporting each other through the aftermath. Some had lost their homes. Others had lost their marriages. One man had attempted suicide after Derek's blackmail drove him to bankruptcy. In a strange way, Derek's death had saved more lives than just Jacob's. His schemes had been escalating, his blackmail becoming more vicious. The police investigation revealed he'd been researching other potential suicide targets. 3 other men he'd scammed who had substantial life insurance policies. If Rachel hadn't stopped him that night, who knows how many more people would have died. That knowledge helped, sometimes. In the dark moments when I questioned everything we'd done, when I wondered if there had been another way, remembering the lives saved made the guilt more bearable. Jacob and Rachel's marriage had survived, though it was forever changed. They'd been through the crucible together, and they'd emerged both stronger and more fragile. They'd learned things about each other, what they were capable of under extreme duress, what lines they'd crossed to survive, that couldn't be unlearned. "Mom," Jacob said one evening over dinner at my house, "I need to tell you something. Rachel and I have been talking, and we want you to know how grateful we are for everything you did. You could have called the police immediately. You could have protected yourself and let us face the consequences alone. But you didn't. You stood by us. You're my son," I said simply. "What else would I do?" "Most mothers wouldn't have helped stage a crime scene," Rachel said quietly. "Most mothers wouldn't have risked prison to protect their children. What you did, it was extraordinary." I shook my head. "What I did was necessary. But I'd be lying if I said I was proud of it. I broke the law. I lied to police. I helped cover up a death, even if it was a justified death. Those aren't things to be proud of, Jacob. They're things you do when you have no other choice." "Do you regret it?" he asked. I thought about that for a long time. I regret that it was necessary. I regret that Derek Morrison entered our lives. I regret the damage he did to so many people. But do I regret protecting you? No. I'd do it again in a heartbeat. The story had eventually faded from the news cycle, replaced by newer scandals and tragedies. The social media groups disbanded. People moved on to the next viral story. But for us, the aftermath would last forever. I'd learned things about myself I'd never wanted to know. I'd learned that maternal love could override moral absolutes, that the law and justice aren't always the same thing, that good people can do questionable things for the right reasons. I'd learned that survival sometimes requires compromises that change who you are fundamentally. Looking at my son and daughter-in-law now, I saw the scars Derek had left. Physical scars on Jacob's hands where he'd grabbed the hot gun barrel. Emotional scars in Rachel's eyes when she had nightmares. Financial scars in the modest apartment they now called home. But I also saw resilience, strength, the determination to rebuild what Derek had tried to destroy. As the sun set over Denver that evening, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, I thought about the moment I'd woken to those scraping sounds 6 months ago. The moment that had divided my life into before and after. If I could go back, knowing what I know now, would I do anything differently? The answer, I realized, was no. Because when you love someone, truly, deeply love them, you don't abandon them in their darkest hour. You don't let them face monsters alone. You stand beside them, even when standing beside them means crossing lines you never imagined you'd cross. Derek Morrison had tried to destroy my family. He'd blackmailed, manipulated, and ultimately attempted murder. His final revenge, that automated email, had been meant to finish what his life couldn't complete. But we'd survived. We'd adapted. We'd fought back. And though the victory had cost us dearly, it was still a victory. As I write this now, nearly a year after that terrible November night, I want everyone who's watched this story unfold to understand something. Life isn't simple. Justice isn't always black and white. Sometimes good people are forced into impossible situations where every choice has consequences. And all you can do is choose the path that lets you look at yourself in the mirror. We chose to protect our family. We chose survival over strict legal compliance. We chose each other. And while I can't say we emerged unscathed, I can say we emerged together. If you've stayed with me through this entire journey, thank you. Thank you for listening without judgment, for trying to understand the impossible situation we faced. Please, take a moment to subscribe to this channel. Like this video if our story moved you, and leave a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Knowing there are people out there who understand, who empathize, who recognize that life sometimes demands more from us than we think we can give. That connection means everything. My name is Carolyn Mitchell. I'm 63 now, 1 year older and infinitely wiser than I was on that November night. I live in Denver, Colorado, in a house that will forever be marked by what happened within its walls. But it's still home. It's still filled with love. And despite everything, despite the cost and the compromises and the scars, that's enough. Because in the end, love, fierce, protective, uncompromising love, is what saves us. Even when saving comes at a terrible price.